If I may have your attention, please. At this time, we're going to begin the service here in the sanctuary for Dr. Stuart Levin. As we begin the service, I would ask if any of you has a cell phone or any other noise-making device, please turn them off at this time. Officiating the services here today are Rabbi Jeffrey Weil and Cantor Daniel Gale. We're going to begin the service with active service personnel from the United States Army presenting the flag to the family. As we proceed with this, while taps is being played, I would ask everyone to please stand. Thank you. Please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your honorable, faithful service.
Stuart Levin began his career in earnest in infectious diseases when he was serving the Army as a doctor. So grateful for the service personnel who've been here this afternoon to present the flag to Bobby. Adonai, mi yagor b'ohalecha, mi yishkon b'har kodshecha, olech tamim ufoel tzedek, v'dover emet bilvavo. The words of the psalmist saying, Adonai, eternal God, who may abide in your tent and who may dwell in your holy mountain? It is those who are upright. It is those who do justly. It is those who speak the truth in their hearts, who would not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon others. It is those who scorn lawlessness and those who honor those who revere God. It is those who give their word and, come what may, do not retract. It is those who would never exploit others. It is those who will not take bribes. Those who live in such a way shall never be shaken. Friend, Stuart Levin was never shaken. Esa enai el harim, me'ain yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, osei shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes unto the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the eternal God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. Behold, the Shomer Yisrael, the protector of Israel, does not slumber or sleep. God is your guardian and your protection at your right hand. May the sun not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. May God guard you from all harm. May God guard your soul, your going out and your coming forth, now and forever. You'll find in our handouts the 23rd Psalm. Adonai ro'i lo echzar, b'not desher yarbitzeni, al mei b'nuchot yinahaleni nafshi yeshuvev. Yancheni v'magle tzedek l'man shemo. Gam ki elech v'geit salmavet lo irara ki ta imadi. Shivtechan mishentecha hema yinachamuni. Taroch v'nai shulchan neget zorai, tishanta v'shemen roshi kosi ravaya. Ach tov v'chetzid tefuni kol yemei chaya. V'shavti b'veit Adonai l'orach yamim. We read together, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Make me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straightness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The verses of the third chapter of Kohelet or Ecclesiastes will sound familiar. They present this idea that everything unfolds in life the way it ought to, that there's a time, a season, a purpose for everything. That's actually a difficult concept to fully absorb, given what we know of life in the world, that there's a time and a purpose for everything. And yet our tradition does guide us in that direction. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot that which is planted, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to grieve, a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time when we must refrain from our embraces, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time for silence, and a time to speak. And so we now take this opportunity for speaking words in memory of, tribute, in honor of Stuart Levin. It's my honor to call up first a colleague, Dr. Omar Latif.
Thank you for the incredible privilege to talk for the next hour and a half. I don't normally get nervous speaking. I've had great teachers. Many of those are in this room. And probably one of the most important of my teachers was Dr. Levin. So trying to figure out what to say after I spoke with Bobby the other day was something that's been on my mind, because the amount of pressure to say something perfect for Dr. Levin is enormous. To save one life is to save the world. This is an expression that is not just in the Talmud. It is quoted in Christianity, is quoted in the Quran, and is quoted throughout time. But to save one life is to save the world. So I want to take an exercise and do a little bit of basic math. Dr. Levin was at Rush for, some say 50 years. I think it was more than that, but it's hard to find records that go back to when he started. I figure with his own hands, he probably made the right diagnosis more often than he made the wrong diagnosis. So on rounds, when he saw a patient, he was usually right. And for those of you who didn't have a chance to see him as a doctor, he was brilliant. And he loved the cases that nobody else could figure out, and he would figure them out like that. Now, there may be some question about it because nobody was smart enough to ever say he was wrong. But the reality is, people came to him sick and left well. So if you just look at the statistics and say maybe he was right once a week, and his decisions on the patients that he saw were right by his own hands, and he rounded, let's just say for 10 years, we'll be very modest here, he probably saved around 560 lives just by making the right decision on an antibiotic or the choice of care. Now, as a teacher, so 560 lives, that's the world over 560 times. It's basic math. As a teacher, countless is the number. When I tried to look and calculate how many people he taught, everywhere you look, it says countless. He taught countless people. He taught countless. So I decided to count them. So when he first started, there were, again, no records of how many residents he had. And so I started asking around his contemporaries, and everybody gave me very different numbers. So I'm going to say about 20, 30 people each year directly, and then indirectly more residents hanging around here and there. So we'll come up with 100. And you figure he impacted 100 people if he was a vice chair or the chair of medicine for 40 years. So that takes me to around 4,000. He had about 300 attendings at one point to reporting directly to him. So let's say at the beginning it was probably half that. And you add them all up, and it's about 12,000 physicians that he directly taught, directly on his own in that portion of his career. So if you add up the residents, you add up some of the fellows, you add up the attendings, I'm at around 21,000 trainees who directly reported to him that he was responsible for giving morning report. And while it is true that he gave the same morning report 47 times a year, he gave a lot of training and he taught a lot of people. And I'm one of the people he taught. So by extension, every person he taught who went on to save a life is the impact that Dr. Levin made. So let's say half of the people he trained left medicine and did nothing, but half did, and half of those were average doctors. So that rules out some of the room. So I figure that results in around 8,000 lives saved over the last 60 years. Now, I did 60 because after he retired, his trainees are still saving lives. So I'm going to do some math here and take 8,000 times 60, and I get 480,000 lives saved. And then I realized I didn't include all his fellows, just in ID. Now, Dr. Levin's fellows in ID are not just Rush fellows. They're fellows all over the country, and in fact, all over the world. So I just figured that's probably another 100,000. I'm just going to add 20,000, so it gives me a nice round number of 500,000 lives Dr. Levin has saved. And you figure there's around 3 million people in the 300 million people in the United States. So he saved 1 out of every 600 people in the United States of America. And since each one counts for saving the world, Dr. Levin has saved the world hundreds of thousands of times. And he'll continue to do so. We, all of those he trained, are still doing what he taught us to do. I wake up and dream in life about making a meaningful impact, and I don't know if I do. I know he did. I know that Dr. Levin believed in doing what was right, regardless of what anybody else ever said. And if you've spent 5 minutes with him, you know he didn't care if you disagreed with what he felt was an absolute right or was morally the direction that you had to go. So any impact that I may make, any impact Rich Abrams may make, who's sitting here, or Dr. Ansel, or Dr. Goodman, or any of you may make, in so many ways is on him. When COVID came, I called a handful of people, and he was one, and I said, what do you think we should do? And he said, save them all. Show everybody what the hell we can do. Hell, we're an ID hospital. I met with one of his trainees in a restaurant later that day, Dr. Goodman, who said the same thing, almost in the exact words of Dr. Levin, because he, like me, is one of those trainees. In the middle of the pandemic, I asked Dr. Levin to join the Zoom calls that we were having every day. And he said, I don't do that. So maybe I can get my granddaughter to come set it up for me or something, but I can just come. And then I got worried if he came, we may not make it through the agenda. If you didn't laugh there, you're wrong. The COVID response that Rush had was a function of what Dr. Levin was and taught us to do. Open your doors, take people, try to treat people, take the sickest people you can find, take the people that other people don't want, try to make an impact when nobody else will. And that's what we did. That impact is on him. Those lives saved, I didn't include in the 500,000 when we did the math. And when we had a bad day or when I got yelled at, I called him. And if you don't believe me, ask Bobby, who must be annoyed as hell at us. Because I called him a lot every time we made a mistake. And he told me not to worry about it. And then if I made another mistake, he got in the way of the person who was mad at me and me, even when I was wrong. He'll be saving the world for decades to come. The impact that he made goes far beyond the impact that he made with his hands. The impact that he made is what he taught us all to be. He told me once, as an insecure young doctor, that as soon as I figure out who I am, I'm going to make a real impact. It's kind of an insult, but it was so true. He raised me professionally. And on my worst days, as I said, he guided me. That includes last month, and it includes last week. On Friday, he told people in this room to take care of me. You know, I didn't deserve some of the people in my life. And I didn't deserve Dr. Levin to take such good care of me personally. And I realized one day when I walked into my office after he'd retired years ago, Bobby had a doctor's appointment and he would kind of mosey down to the office. And when Dr. Levin walked in the office, you just canceled what you had. And I walk in and he's in the waiting room. And I look and I think, Dr. Levin should not be in the waiting room. It was just weird. He was in the waiting room. So I said, follow me to the office, put him in the office. And then we changed the sign on the door for the office to have his name on it. It says Stuart Levin on the office. And it says that now if you walk in. Dr. Levin's not allowed to wait in the house that he built in a waiting room. He built Rush in so many different ways, but he didn't just stop there. He made everybody who worked there want to do better and make an impact. Dr. Levin, I am honored to work in your office, and I wish peace and blessings to you and all in your orbit forever. Thank you.
Dr. Lateef, thank you so much. Honored to call forward Dr. Larry Goodman.
Thank you, and I'm particularly honored as well to speak here today. I first met Stu in 1976. I was a first-year resident at Rush, and I'd heard a lot about him. He was supposed to be this incredibly smart doctor, and I was not from Chicago and not familiar with anybody in the place. And as I think could have been my first night on call. And I hear there's going to be a patient admitted, and she's being directly admitted by Dr. Stuart Levin. So I thought, terrific. This is going to be an unbelievably complicated case with all kinds of exposures and who knows what's going on, high fevers. I should be really ready. And of course, when I was a first-year resident, I knew nothing, so I was also pretty nervous. The patient, about 4 or 5 hours later, elevator doors open, and this 17-year-old woman walks in. Behind her are her parents. She looks pretty normal to me. She's tan. She's got a little rosy cheeks on both sides. And the mother says, well, you know, we talked to Dr. Levin. He thought she might have lupus. And in fact, there is a rash of lupus that looks sort of like this. And she was in Florida and developed this rash. And so I said, okay, but it wouldn't normally be a reason for admission. Of course, in those days, any physician could just direct an admission, not like today. And so she gets admitted and goes to the bed, and I examine her thinking, there's probably going to be something pretty remarkable on physical exam, or the labs are going to be crazy. It was normal. Everything seemed normal. And so I think, all right. So I called Dr. Levin, which is what we do. And I called him at about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And I said, you know, I've seen your patient, and she looks terrific. She got a little rash, might have lupus. Serology's been sent off, but seems fine. But she probably looked different when you saw her. He said, I've never seen her. I said, you never seen her? I said, well, maybe you haven't seen her with this illness, but maybe she was really sick before and you were just especially worried. And he said, no, I've never seen her in my life. He said, I talked to her mom, who was a friend of somebody's, who called me, and then they called somebody and they asked me to talk to her. So I talked to her on the phone from Florida, and they described her, it says no cell phone, so you couldn't see the rash, but the rash was described. It sounded like lupus, and I thought she should come in. And I said, well, I think she might well have lupus, Dr. Levin, but that's, you know, this could be worked up as an outpatient. He said, but did she tell you she had a little cough? I said, yeah, she has a little cough. Maybe she had a cold, but it was like nothing. Chest x-ray is clear. And he said, well, there is this thing, it's lupus lung, and it can really come on quickly. And so you really have to be ready. So I just thought she'd be better off in the hospital for a day or two. If she's stable, she can go home. So, you know, I, unembarrassed at all to show my stupidity, I just said, you know, I never heard of lupus lung. What is that? And he said, well, it's not been written about. In fact, it's never been published, but it's a thing. And he said, and in my experience, and remember, we're talking about a non-infectious disease. This is the ID expert saying, in my experience, this is something that you really have to watch because it can just explode. So I'm thinking, you know, what is he talking about? And I get off the phone and I'm thinking, this is what they think is smart around here. Somebody just makes up stuff. And so, so a day later, she was much sicker and almost ready to be intubated. Dr. Levin started steroids. She was seen by the specialists, the rheumatologists, the immunologists, all of whom said, hold off until we have cultures negative, we improve the serology. Not him. He was treating. And I believe it saved her life. It was remarkable. And I would say that you'd think, okay, at this moment, I'm remembering this unique diagnosis that somebody made back in 1976. It was my first time seeing him diagnose a patient. And I saw it over and over and over, where he would make these diagnoses that were remarkable, remarkable. For all of us who are in ID and were trained with him, he was almost always right. It was amazing. And ID people, we don't have a procedure. We don't do surgeries. We don't do procedures. We're like the least coordinated of the doctors. You know, all we can do is talk to people. We can take a history, that's about it. We can do a physical, we can read labs. That's what we do. He did that better than everybody. He would take sort of the Socratic history where he would somehow get the right question and the answer out of you to support a diagnosis. So we used to play sort of a game, and many of the people in this audience will know this, which was we said, well, he's clearly the smartest doctor I've ever seen. But what's interesting is we're all from mostly different programs. There's 35 of us in the class, and again, this is kind of a numbers game like Dr. Latif was thinking. And if we're from 15 or 20 different programs, and there's 3 classes of residents in internal medicine, and there's fellows, we probably represent 40 or 50 programs from around the country. We were there as medical students. We saw all the doctors. He's way smarter than everybody. So is he the smartest doctor in the United States? And then we think, well, maybe. And then, but think of this decade after decade after decade of residents agreeing on only one thing, that he was the smartest diagnostician, the best doctor they'd ever seen. And it was really remarkable. And what was amazing rounding with him, those days when he was really rounding, was that he had this combination of science and humanity. You can know all the facts in the world, but all of us, some days, whatever we do, we become patients. And we have secrets. And we don't mean them to be secrets, or some we do mean to be secrets, but some of them are incredibly important to make the right diagnosis. And you have to trust your physician to say those things. And then the physician has to be smart enough to even ask the questions that might be relevant to what you have. Stu could do that. He did it in an amazing way, and we saw it all the time. And when you see that combination of science and humanity as a trainee, it's inspiring. It doesn't mean you can do it, but you can see where it could actually work. That actually, if you knew enough science and if you could relate to people well enough, there was actually an answer somewhere in almost everything. And he made you believe that, and he made such a big difference. So you'd think that somebody that was that committed to excellence and quality wouldn't be very tolerant of mistakes. But that's not true either. So in fact, at a time today, which is common, but in those days it wasn't, when people looked at medical errors, sometimes it was with an eye towards like, who made the mistake? Not in Dr. Levin's department. He would bring people together and he would start by saying, I've made more mistakes than all of you in this room put together. What we're going to do is to take the care that is outstanding in this department and make it even better. And in fact, he would always correct people and say, what we're doing is trying to make something even better. We're not trying to find out who made a mistake or who did something wrong. He then went into administrative work, still saw a lot of patients and taught a lot, but became a chair of medicine, a vice dean, and suddenly the science of it all is changed to the operational activities that we do. It's finances, it's buildings, it's deliveries, it's things like that. And the humanity of it, doesn't help very much to just get to know a vendor or something, but it became the humanities. Stu read voraciously. He not only read medical literature, veterinary literature, diseases that Chihuahuas get in Germany. He would know things that there is no reason to know. But he also read Greek tragedy. He was into opera and music. And suddenly, the day-to-day things that we were concerned about, or sometimes aggravated about, were elevated to a whole different discussion. Maybe the IV tubing or the alarms for some kind of IV thing that we were doing wasn't being delivered by a vendor on time. And I would talk to him about it, and we would try to figure out what to do. Suddenly, he's talking about the Peloponnesian War and how this vendor is just like that general. And it's the same exact mistake made. And I was thinking, like, how did we get to the Peloponnesian War? What are we talking about? And so why did that happen? And so I'm looking up the Peloponnesian War, which is like 2,500 years ago, and I couldn't find anything on IV tubing in it. But the lesson, I think, was there's a reason why Greek tragedies and Shakespearean tragedies and opera resonate with people, because they're about good and evil, clear good and evil, because those rules make a civil, functional society. And what Stu passionately believed was a step down the steps of evil entering your world is a problem and should be called out. And he would call it out. He would say, it's not good enough if something's late. People have to at least recognize that somebody's inconvenienced. It could cost more money, and on top of it, somebody could be harmed. And he would make sure people knew it. With all of this, the other aspect that was so unique and special about Stu was Bobby and your entire family. This is a family that, when people talk about Rush being Stu's family was Rush's family. I came to Chicago, as I mentioned, and I didn't know anybody in Chicago. The Levins were my family, and the Levins are my family. And it's not just me, it's countless people that came through that program that realized you can have some kind of a balance in your life, and there can be personal relationships that are really unbelievably important and really help when people especially are going through the kind of training people do in healthcare, when things happen that you're pretty down about. Passover dinners, Bobby, at your place, I just don't even know how you did it. The table, which would ever expand, would start from the great room into the dining room, into the living room. It probably went up the stairs into bathrooms. I have no idea. All of us, I feel guilty to this day. I don't think I've ever RSVP'd to any of your things. And somehow there was always a seat there. And I don't think anybody RSVP'd. And who knows how many people Stu invited. And pretty much everybody went. And it was special for everybody. And it was something that just all of us grew up with all of you. And it's just been just so wonderful to be a part of it. So what I ended up thinking with all of this was, looking back on those days in 1976, when I and so many other people would play that game about, is he the smartest doctor in the United States? It was kind of a silly thing. We wasted way too much time on it. Stu Levin was the best doctor in the world. And even that description really sells him short. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman, so much. It's an honor to call forward my friend, Dr. Alan Harris.
I need notes. I can't do what Omar and Mary do. I am so sad to be up here and so honored to have been asked by the Levin family to speak. Judy, I, and the whole Harris family, including my brother Max and my nephew Jordy, who were Stu's chief residents over the years, have been friends and family to the Levins during both happy and sad times since I was Dr. Levin's fellow 50 years ago. We extend our heartfelt condolences to Bobby, to Leslie and Stuart, to Jackie and Phil, to Danny and Rebecca, to Brian and Linda, to Cynthia, to Jordan and Kathy. There are Bobby and Stuart's 11 grandchildren and his brother Edwin. And there, and quite frankly, all of our tremendous loss. It's easy to find a place to start to talk about Stu. It's more difficult to figure out where to stop talking about this wonderful, remarkable man who, as you've heard, so impacted so many lives, including, I suspect, the lives of everyone gathered here today. You have heard the eloquent remarks of my friends, Rabbi Jeffrey Weil, Dr. Omar Latif, Dr. Barry Goodman. You know, rabbi means teacher, and the word and doctor is derived from the Latin for teacher. So there's a bunch of teachers around here. They beautifully capsulized so much of the essence of Dr. Levin, his leadership and importance to what is the current Rush University Medical Center and Rush University over the 56 years since his arrival at the then Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital in 1967, which the year his and Bobby's youngest child, that's the youngest of 6, Jordan, was born. These speakers are a tough group to follow. I'll try not to be too repetitive in my remarks. Husband, biologic father, grandfather, brother, uncle, role model, mentor, colleague, friend, care provider, medical advisor, professional father, and likely some combination of all of these to everyone gathered here. Did Dr. Levin command the audience in whatever room he was in? You're damn right he did. And he both enjoyed and deserved it. He actually commands the audience today. He was a people magnet. So what do I think underlied all my friends' accomplishments and accolades? Certainly, as you've heard, his incredible knowledge, judgment, wisdom, teaching, passion, and work ethic earned him his great national reputation. Organizations like Jewish United Fund and the Anti-Defamation League reached out, wanting to honor him. And of course, he let them do that, and they were wonderful events. But reputation is what you do when everybody's watching. What is your soul? What is your core? These are your character. Character is what you do when no one is looking. I think it is Dr. Levin's character that defined and motivated him. Over the last 47 years, Judy and I have lived within a few blocks of Bobby and Stuart. Stu and I frequently drove up and back to work together, giving us plenty of time to talk. You know, you learn by listening, not by talking. I think Dr. Levin is the only person I have ever known who could learn from himself while he was doing all the talking. You all know this means that when we were in the car, he spoke 90% of the time, and I about 10% of the time. But I did listen. Dr. Levin took great pride in his blue-collar upbringing and what he called his second or lower-class academic pedigree. He was the son of a carpenter, attended Chicago Public Schools, graduating from Marshall High School on the West Side. You can see he didn't move too far geographically during his whole life. He did undergrad at the University of Illinois Chicago, which was then at the unrenovated Navy Pier and was a warehouse. U of I Med School, internship, residency, fellowship at the Cook County, Westside VA, and University of Illinois hospitals. And as you saw with his honor guard, served 2 years in the U.S. Army at Fort Leonard Wood, contributing groundbreaking work in the prevention and therapy of meningococcal meningitis, a devastating disease which caused military outbreaks and for which at the time there was no vaccine. What you've heard, and is so true, is that Dr. Levin always focused on people and strove to elevate them, whether they were known or unknown to him, individuals or groups. Many of us here today were motivated by him and provided our career opportunities by him. He didn't see people by race, religion, color, creed, ethnicity, sexual or gender identity. He was for diversity, equity, and inclusion and wellness before this became the jargon of today. He created a Shomer Shabbos residency within our bigger residency. He took great pride in that. But more importantly, he mandated that our residency provide time and coverage for all our Department of Medicine residents to celebrate the holidays of their faith, not just the holidays mandated nationally. He had a calendar with every holiday in the world on it. We all wanted to be like Stu. Stuart took great pleasure, pride, and joy in all the accomplishments of his biologic and professional offspring. And as you've heard, his professional offspring numbered in the thousands. Many of them are here today. They're leaders in patient care, teaching, research, and administration across the country. He especially loved his chief residents, who he got to have as a captive audience for an extra voluntary year of training. He created an every 5-year chief resident reunion. I think he would have really enjoyed this reunion. I can't name all of the wonderful people in this room who are his professional children, so I will name none of you. You know who you are. Dr. Levin fought for rubella immunization for children in the state of Illinois so that when young women gave birth eventually, they could not give birth to children with congenital rubella syndrome. He fought to require dentists and GI doctors and surgeons to provide care to patients with HIV. He fought for and relished Russia's affiliation with Cook County Hospital and the integration of 4 of our Department of Medicine fellowship programs with Cook County Hospital. You probably noticed how frequently I use the word fought. Stuart had an incredible compass for what was moral, ethical, just, fair, kind, caring, and compassionate. This was his character. He fought because he needed to fight. He had to fight. He needed a cause. He thrived on fighting for people, but importantly, as I think Omar said, he was fearless of personal consequences or personal repercussions. That's real courage. How could you not want to be like Stu? So the last 6 months since Stu and Bobby returned from Florida have not been easy. He had been dwindling the last few years, losing weight, losing height, difficulty with speech, swallowing imbalance, loss of muscle mass, recurring pneumonia, falls at home. Yet he fought on. I would drive him to Rush to see his friends, his colleagues, his caregivers, or attend ID conference. He hated the walker, but I told him I would no longer drive him if he didn't use it. He used it, which I think is one of the few occasions that I'm aware of when he did what someone told him to do, let alone me. His speech was more hesitant, but his mind was sharp. He now spoke 95 to 100% of the time in the car. I listened. He spoke about the love and pride he had for Bobby, his kids and their spouses, and his grandkids. He spoke about finishing his memoirs, which he had been working on the past several years, and which Bob and Esther Manowith, and along with Dr. David Ansel, have just recently helped him finish and accomplish. He would talk about how his goal was to be there for Bobby, but that he was no longer of much help to her, and actually got concerned that he was a burden to her. He talked about his great life, his great career, and his great biologic and professional families. He talked about how fortunate he was and what a great life he had had. He apologized for telling some of the stories over and over. I told him I loved hearing them, which was true most of the time. Sadly, to my ears, he would tell me he was dying and not going to live much longer. A problem with Stu is that he could never BS anyone, and certainly could not BS himself. I struggled with him talking about his own death, and would tell him, not so fast, and he really wasn't that smart that he knew God's plan. I couldn't imagine this larger-than-life figure gone. I've always encouraged young doctors to understand that you'll never be smart enough to care for another human being, and you must continue learning, because your eyes can't see what your mind doesn't know. My eyes could see that my friend was dying, and my mind knew that, as usual, he was right. My problem was my heart could not accept this now reality. As usual in his life, he did it his way. He decided when, where, and how he was going to die. And he did so peacefully, surrounded by his loving family. In our Western culture, we seem to think something significant is happening when everybody is talking. This is especially true in these days of social media. However, in the culture of our Native American brothers and sisters, they know something significant is happening when no one is talking and all is quiet and still. Stuart's passing is a real significant event. All of us are now talking. My hope is that all of us, when we are alone, when all is quiet, and we are talking silently to ourselves, will reflect on the positive impact he had on each and every one of our lives. I, as many of us here, learned a lot more than medical stuff from Dr. Levin. When I was a young parent, or he already had 6 kids when I was a young parent, he told me that the worst punishment he could do to his kids was to talk to them. He said they would beg to be beaten. I think this not only worked for me with my kids, but I think it was a great tactic that he used on people who he fought with, whether you were friend or foe. You might also have noticed that I frequently refer to Stuart as Dr. Levin. One of my favorite Stu stories was when Leslie and his son-in-law Stuart provided Bobby and Stu with their first grandchild, Zach. Everyone was excited, and everyone was asking Stu, what do you want to be called? Zadie, grandfather, grandpa, papa, something else? He didn't miss a beat in responding. My grandson can call me what everybody calls me, Dr. Levin. I think we all had difficulty calling this man anything but Dr. Levin. If one's wealth and worth are measured not by what you have, but by what you give, and if, as it is said, those that give receive more in return, then Stuart died a wealthy man who experienced great joy. I personally, and I believe all of us assembled here, love and will miss you, my dear friend, Dr. Stuart Levin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Moving tribute to all of you. Thank you. I'm honored to call forward granddaughter Carly. And more.
Hi, my name is Carly and I'm one of my Grandpa Stuart's 11 grandchildren. I'm speaking on behalf of all my cousins, my siblings, Jeremy and Sam, along with my cousins, Zach, Emily, Max, Eden, Ari, Gabe, Talia, Aiden, and Jake. My grandpa was so many things to so many people: a doctor, teacher, friend, mentor, activist, philanthropist, father to his kids and their partners, and even a father to many of the residents he trained at the hospital. When I was little, my entire extended family would go to my Bubby and Grandpa's every Friday night for Shabbat dinner. I'd always invite a friend to join me to experience my Bubby's matzo ball soup and cabbage soup, and I always made sure that they knew my grandpa was the chairman of medicine at Rush. I grew up knowing my grandpa was a big deal and wanted all my friends to know it too. I even invited my grandpa to talk to my 6th grade class about infectious diseases. Of course, everything he said went way over everyone's head. I mean, we were 11 and 12 years old, not med students, But I'll always remember when one of my classmates asked my grandpa a ton of questions at the end of his lecture, even walking my grandpa all the way from the classroom to the front door of the school. I'll never forget feeling so proud of who my grandpa was. But he wasn't just an amazing doctor. He had so many hobbies like drawing, playing piano, listening to jazz, reading detective novels, going to the symphony, and fishing, which he loved to do in Sleepy Hollow, Michigan. When we were little, our grandpa took my cousins Zach and Max on his little dinghy to go fishing. They were far from shore when they ran out of gas. When one of the neighbors came out on a jet ski to help tow them to shore, my grandpa shooed the man away and started paddling the boat himself. The neighbor came back to shore to tell my family, who told him not to accept my grandpa's no. The neighbor came back on his jet ski, and my grandpa reluctantly agreed to let the neighbor tow them back. Our grandpa was stubborn, to say the least, a quality I'm sure everyone here is aware of, but he was also extremely loving, funny, and caring. He always wanted to know what was new with all the grandkids. He made sure to tell us how wonderful we were every time we saw him, making all the grandkids feel unique, smart, and most importantly, loved. We could do no wrong in his eyes. He taught us to pursue what we are passionate about. From my cousin Talia pursuing sound engineering to my sister Sam following in my grandpa's footsteps as a third-year medical student at no other than Rush. But the most important thing our grandpa taught my cousins and me how to do was love, because he loved our Bubby more than anything in the world, and she was the only one who could successfully tell him what to do. Our Bubby always planned fun activities, and he would just say, okay. He was always along for the ride. Like when we started going to an indoor water park resort in the Wisconsin Dells every Hanukkah. Not a lot of grandparents or infectious disease doctors would let their grandchildren run free in a germ-infested water park for 3 days. My cousins and I would not be as bonded as we are without my Bubby and Grandpa. They have consistently fostered our closeness from the days of dancing on their family room table as kids to just a couple of weeks ago at our yearly Hanukkah dinner the night before Thanksgiving, where all the grandkids gather at Bubby and Grandpa's condo to catch up on our lives. What Bubby and Grandpa created was a culture of love, community, and giving, and it's hard to put into words just how special that is and how much better we all are for getting to be part of their lives. I know I speak for all my cousins when I say none of us would be the people we are today without the love and support our grandpa gave us. We all love you so much today and always. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly, and all of you. Thank you so very much. Danny Levin.
Unlike my father, Larry, and Omar, I also need notes. I was asked by my siblings to speak on their behalf today. I thank them for this honor. Much of what you may have heard about what made my father such an admired and loved physician and mentor also made him a great father. When speaking with the rabbi after my father died, something that was emphasized by each of my siblings was the palpable love that he felt for us. Leslie and Jackie both relate experiences when they were either urgently injured or sick and felt my father's immense will to break through any barrier to get them the help that they needed. My father was obviously born with lots of great intelligence, but like most people who accomplish great things, he also needed to work incredibly hard. When we were young, he was rounding at 3 hospitals and was routinely getting home at 9 p.m. He did say over the past years when my siblings and I were having our own children, that his only regret in life was that he worked too much when we were growing up. My siblings and I concurred, though, when speaking with the rabbi, that we always felt our Father's presence in our life and never felt we were not getting enough of him. How did he do this? After getting home at 9 p.m. and eating his dinner, he would then begin to read medical journals. But he did not need to go and seclude himself to read his articles. Due to his great capacities, he had the ability to read these journals while sitting amongst all of us, running around, talking, fighting, while he simultaneously watched his beloved White Sox. Another reason we felt his love and devotion to us is that he made certain family time sacrosanct. He was wise enough to follow my mother's lead on many important family matters. My mother wanted Judaism to be an important part of our lives. My father took off time for many of the Jewish holidays, which we all spent together. As Carly mentioned, my mother had Shabbat dinners every Friday night throughout the time we lived with them, and continued that tradition when my siblings and I had our own children. My mother wanted to travel when we were growing up, but with 6 kids, money was tight. My mother decided we should take up camping. The City Slickers experimented with a camping trip to Michigan and Wisconsin, and with newfound confidence, began a yearly tradition of 3 to 4 week car trips, where we eventually traveled through 48 states in the Union and half the provinces of Canada. It's hard to find better family time than camping. My brother Brian brought up a loving memory of my father regarding these camping trips. He recalled how we would have to drive great distances and sometimes arrive at the campgrounds at 1 a.m. Brian said my father would light the Coleman lantern and set up the huge, ridiculously heavy and complicated Sears tent by himself while we were all sleeping in the car. And we would somehow find ourselves tucked away in our sleeping bags when we woke up in the morning. Something else that made him a great father relates to his professional life. Countless times in our lives, people would walk up to us or one of us and say that our father had saved their or one of their family members' life. As we've heard from the 3 great doctors who spoke today, countless people at work felt my father was a great doctor or a mentor to him. We all felt great pride hearing these wonderful comments said about him, and undoubtedly felt strengthened having him as our patriarch. Another one of his great characteristics was relayed by my sister, Jackie, and some of my nieces and nephews. They said they always felt unconditional acceptance from my father. I consider this a truly great trait of someone who achieved as much as my father and pushed himself so hard, something I think Alan alluded to. Along the same lines, and equally important, my father's love and acceptance was immediate and openly expressed for each of the spouses my siblings and I chose. There is one thing that all my siblings insisted I include in my remarks today. And if you know my sisters and you care about your personal safety, you do what they say. I can see they know I'm speaking the truth. And this was something said already, but it is worth repeating. The most important point they wanted to mention about my father is that above all else, he loved our mother as deeply as humanly possible. He told us after each of us was born, he'd walk into the maternity ward and the nurses would show him the newborn baby, which actually happened to be one of his new children. And he'd quickly look at us and say, looks good, great, but where is Bobby and how is she doing? As his physical health declined, he repeatedly said that he most wanted to stay alive so that he can take care of my mother. My mother commented the other day how difficult it was for my father to accept that he had reached a point when he was no longer strong enough to take care of her. On a personal note, I have always known how fortunate I was to have two great parents. Of course, part of the reason I went to medical school was to make my father proud. I realized, though, I was never going to be my father and chose a different specialty than him. I strived, however, to absorb as many of his profound insights as possible. As a psychiatrist, I have invoked his wisdom in my work with numerous patients, often saying something, you know, I know this great doctor who told me such and such. I have feared this day for many years as I have relied greatly upon my father. I always felt I had someone in my life who I could turn to, who had the answer for everything. I will painfully miss my father and think about him every day for the rest of my life. I recently read Shakespeare's play Hamlet for a book club I'm in with some friends. We were in fact supposed to meet this past Sunday night to discuss Hamlet, but we canceled because my father's condition had rapidly declined. Toward the end of the play, while Hamlet is dying and is being held by his loyal friend Horatio, Hamlet implores Horatio to not drink from the poisoned cup of wine so that he may go on living and tell Hamlet's story. When Hamlet dies, Horatio says, "Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince. And flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." I will end by paraphrasing Shakespeare. Good night, sweet father. You have worked so hard and done so much for all of us. Now may you rest in peace. We have and will always love you from the deepest parts of our hearts.
Extraordinarily moving. Danny, thank you. So much has been said about Stuart. I won't repeat, I'll try not to repeat. Just a couple thoughts. There's a story of a rich man who doubted that the great philosopher Maimonides was also a brilliant physician. And so this rich man decided to test Maimonides. And so what did he do? He fasted for 3 days, this man. He didn't bathe. He didn't sleep. And so he arrived at Maimonides' office. This is in the 12th century, looking terrible, terribly ill. Maimonides took a quick look at this man and said, "Here's some money. Buy yourself some food and a bar of soap." The man was amazed. And he said, "You're not only an excellent doctor, but you're a righteous man as well." Friends, I have known that I would share that story at this moment for this funeral since I met Stuart Levin. For I have known for years, as we all have, that rarely has there been one like Maimonides, and rarely has there been one like Stuart Levin. Master physicians, both of them, and much more. Master teachers as well, we've heard this. Maimonides taught through voluminous books, Stuart through voluminous lectures. Maimonides' books were hundreds of pages long. Stuart's lectures were hundreds of minutes long. Maimonides taught ethical living. Stuart lived ethically. It was innate for him. He never faced an ethical quandary because the right ethical course was always very clear to him. For Maimonides, healing was a religious obligation. Same for Stuart. I was always curious and really amazed that at our Shabbat morning services, which Stuart and Bobby have attended regularly, that during the healing prayer, the Mishaberach, when you're healing for other people and we can offer names, that Dr. Stuart Levin would often raise his hand and mention someone who might benefit from such a prayer. Stuart believed in healing through the human intellect and through the ultimate intellect. And finally, it is true, Maimonides revealed through his writings a deep attachment to his family. And Stuart's family, you are all his body and soul. Stuart Levin, MD, was primarily Stuart Levin friend and son and brother-in-law, uncle. He was Stuart Levin, as we have heard, father, father-in-law, grandfather, and most of all, as we have also heard, he was Stuart Levin, husband to Bobby, whom he loved completely. As a boy, Stuart loved Sherlock Holmes stories, maybe beyond his childhood. He would come to emulate that eminent crime detective by becoming an eminent disease detective. And he began by diagnosing his most immediate subject, himself. At 10 years old, I heard this story, he went alone to a medical clinic at 10, and it was closing time at this clinic. And they said, it's only a cold. And he said, no, it's not only a cold, and you're not closing either, said this bold 10-year-old boy. I'm having an asthma attack. And he was right. And he vowed at that tender age to never be as dismissive to other people as these adults were to him as a child. He honored that vow. His self-diagnoses never ceased. A couple of days ago, Stuart said about himself, delirium, and somehow he was right. He was bold and he was fearless. In high school, we've heard about his intellectual fearlessness, but there's more than that. In high school, he heard that his younger brother Edwin was being roughed up by some kids at the gym. Skinny Stuart rushed over. He took on the multiple bullies. They backed off. It is no wonder that some girls at camp around that time thought he was cute. He was. But Stuart was shy. But then something else happened. At 19 years old, he was set up by the Kaplans with a pretty 17-year-old. They met up for a performance at the College of Jewish Studies. Stuart might have been shy at that time, but Bobby, this cute girl, was decidedly not shy. On that first date, she invited him to her prom. Stuart, ever the gentleman, said no. Who had the money for such a luxury? They dated anyway, and later it was Stuart's turn to be bold. One day, in a fit of passion, he declared to Bobby, "That's it, we're getting married." This time it was Bobby who demurred. Was she ready? She was young. So she asked her friends a series of pointed questions, or her friends asked her a series of pointed questions about this Stuart Levin. They asked, for instance, "Can you handle the crazy way he dresses?" "Yes," Bobby said, "she can handle that." Then they asked, "Can you handle the crazy way he eats?" Yes, she could tolerate that too. So Bobby found no reason not to marry Stuart. And so they married. 67 years of marriage, so it was a good decision. Bobby worked in these early years as Stuart studied in medical school. Years later, quite a number of years later, when the family had arrived, and it was a big, rambunctious family, 6 children, Bobby was going back to study for herself. And Stuart at this point was chief, the mammoth job, mammoth professional responsibilities he had. And so, but nonetheless, he repaid, in a sense, the favor. He assumed the household responsibilities, even with his mammoth responsibilities, his mammoth job responsibilities, including doing laundry. So Bobby was studying, he was at home, doing laundry, cooking, not necessarily well, but doing it. And if any of the 6 of you could not find your shoes because you didn't put them away, you could check the laundry chute. They might be there, he'd just throw them down there. Stuart was the man, as we have heard, who welcomed all. As the family grew, he welcomed all into the family and welcomed all in general, in any context, as we have heard from his colleagues. He learned through life that acceptance, regardless of distinctions, acceptance is primary. Acceptance supersedes all other considerations. This includes his acceptance of all of you, his children, his grandchildren. He accepted who you were, valued who you were, encouraged you to be who you were. He was the grandfather about whom Gabriel wrote, "Without him, we are nothing." Stuart Levin was a gratified man. He told me so. He told me a few years back that he'd look around the table with the family at holiday dinners and he'd think, and I'm quoting, he'd think, "Gee, am I lucky because of you?" Well, we're all the lucky ones. All of us, including those of us here as part of the Ezra Habanim, Niles Township community. Stuart and Bobby's generosity and kindness is deeply, deeply appreciated. Big things and little things. Thanks to them, Julie and I enjoyed a Beatles Shakespearean comedy. Another congregant enjoyed a night at the CSO. And because I made a comment not too long ago that men should dress more colorfully, it was a sincere comment, but I was not expecting to be surprised by this beautiful shirt. My favorite shirt. And I thank you. It is the style and maker that Stuart sported and enjoyed. At a recent Kiddush, this is just a few weeks ago, Stuart talked to me about his mortality. It's not the only time. And we were talking right back there, and with his legs crossed, enjoying a treat and a cup of coffee, he made a gesture of defiance up to the cosmos. It looked something like this. I asked him, what it meant. It was not the first time he'd done that either. I'd seen that before. What did this mean? And he explained to me that it signified his fearless, it was a fearless declaration, I would say, that he, Stuart Levin, did things throughout his life his way, not in a reckless way, in a principled way. That this meant that he followed the path, the derech, the path that he believed in. He pursued the way that he knew, with that confidence that he possessed, was right. And goodness gracious, what a path it was. It was a strong path. It was a noble path. It was a distinguished path. Friends, tomorrow night, sundown, Hanukkah begins, the Festival of Lights. Stuart Levin, modern Maccabee, like the Maccabees, a pursuer of justice, one who stands up against aggressors and bullies, like the Maccabees, devoted to his people, and for Stuart, his people are these people, but also all people. Hanukkah, again, the Festival of Lights, Chag HaOrim. Stuart Levin offered light, light abundant, light brilliant to this world. We are grateful. Zichrono livracha, may his memory always be for blessing. Amen. And so, O God, into your care we entrust the spirit of Stuart Levin. For you keep faith with your children in death as in life. Sustain all of us, O God, that we may meet with serenity the mysteries that lie ahead for us, knowing that when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you, O God, will be with us as a loving friend in whom we put our trust. You, God, are the light of our lives and our hope in eternity. If it's comfortable for you to do so, please rise for the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. Call forward our cantor Daniel Gale, to lead us in the El Malei Rachamim.
Shimon ben Yitzchak Chaim Tolus v'Chayki Began Eden, واستيره بسرك نافخ عليه الاميم وديترو وربيترو رخايم هير نشماتو Adonai hu nachlodu Yandua Mishalom Yanuach b'shalom al mishkon Venomar Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence with the holy and the pure who shine brilliantly like the glow of your firmament. To Stuart Levin, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence and within the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. You may be seated.
This concludes the service here in the sanctuary. The interment will take place immediately at the family's plots at Shalom Memorial Park Cemetery, 1700 West Rand Road in Arlington Heights. Following the interment today, the family will begin sitting at the Schulroof residence, 1140 Forest Avenue in Evanston. We'll be sitting today until 9 p.m., Thursday from 6 until 9, Friday from noon until 3, and Sunday from noon until 3. That information, sorry? Sunday, they'll be sitting from 12 noon until 4 p.m. For those of you watching the service online, that information's on the website that you're currently on. Also ask that you please take note, the family's asked for 2 different memorial contributions. That information's on the service folder. And again, those watching online, that's available as well. For those going in procession with the family, the procession will be forming in the parking lot. Please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker. That sticker should be placed in the front passenger side of the windshield. It also asks that you please have your bright headlights and flashing hazard lights on at all times. For an additional measure of safety, our staff will be placing magnetic flags on the tops of the vehicles. We'll also have a car at the back of the procession to keep us all together. As we drive in procession today, please avoid having any large spaces or large gaps in the procession, particularly as we pass through the intersections. Finally, at this time, I would ask everyone to please rise as Dr. Levin and the clergy and family are escorted. And I would ask that Dr. Levin's 11 grandchildren please come forward and serve as pallbearers. Thank you.